Welcome everyone to this ISTI live stream. We are very excited to have with us Sarah Outland, who is one of our excellent volunteer mentors, virtual mentors. Sarah, thank you so much for joining us.
Happy to be here.
My name is Sarah Perret. For those of you who don't know me, I am a program manager with the Mentor Matching Engine. And one of the reasons we have brought Sarah Outland here to speak with us today is because July is our mentor recruitment month. So I am going to do a shameless plug here at the beginning of this mini episode to say that we are always recruiting for virtual mentors, and we would absolutely love anyone who's interested in getting involved in the volunteering sphere for the coming academic year to tune in, to leave a comment below, to send us a message through Facebook. But more importantly, first and foremost, Sarah, you just completed your dissertation at the University of Chicago. Congratulations.
Thank you.
I would love to just hear an elevator pitch so that our users and our followers could hear a bit about what you've been studying, kind of the breadth of our mentor expertise on the platform.
Sure. So I am a sociologist, and I study teenagers and technology use within the bounds of the high school. So I just, a couple years ago, completed 2 years of field work at a high school where I was studying. They had just rolled out computers for all of their students, so one-to-one technology. So I studied, what does it look like once we have laptops as part of our curriculum and pedagogy, as well as what does it look like when everyone has smartphones. So your mom can text you when you're in algebra, and your teacher can check in on her kid at daycare. So just being highly connected, and that the bounds of the high school don't really exist within the walls of the high school anymore.
And I know that, as we'll talk about in just a minute, the one-to-one computer and the CPS initiative to get all students one-to-one has really been ramped up in light of COVID. But before we kind of touch on that, I would love to hear a little bit more about what it means to be a sociologist. So at ISTI, we do focus a lot on science and tech, and sociology isn't necessarily something people think of when they think of science and tech. How and where do you see that intersection of social science and STEM?
So, I think I think we can think about this in a lot of ways, especially as a sociologist. When I think about STEM, I think about representation in STEM. So my master's work was actually on sort of underrepresented communities where women were underrepresented. And for my case, I actually studied women who were involved with masculine subcultures. But I used a lot of research on women in science fields, particularly women in engineering. So I'm not an engineer, but I think it's important that we think about why do so many women, for instance, go into college intending to major in engineering and either switch their majors before they graduate or graduate with their majors but never end up using those engineering degrees. So especially when we're thinking about science and technology, we hear the leaky pipeline in regards to women all the time. So I think that's particularly where sociology can come into play.
Yeah, and that's one of those statistics that you hear thrown about all the time, but I don't know that a student necessarily seeing that statistic would think, I want to be the person who researches that. I want to be the person who finds that out. So one of the things that I love about the Mentor Matching Engine is the ability to show them these things happening behind the scenes that they might not have a direct model for in their own lives.
Totally. And I don't study anyone who, I don't work with anyone who, there's plenty of projects where students are actually making something as part of the research. That's obviously not what I do. But I think it's also important to think about whenever we're making any sort of product or technology, who it's made for, right? Have you asked people of varying bodily sizes or locations in a city or people that live in rural areas to press the button? Is it at the right height? Is it big enough? Is it visible enough? All those sorts of things too, I think make sociology important.
Yeah, the human-centered design that's at the heart of a lot of, I think, strictly STEM projects, strictly engineering, comes out of sociology. That's a great point and a great lens to kind of think of it through. I will also say, just because, again, I think it's so important to celebrate you for having completed this PhD. I think the hardcore research that you put in and the research skills that you're able to translate to our students always just shines through. So another lens in which those two things really intersect with STEM. Well, pivoting a little bit to looking back at COVID-19, especially with what you specifically studied with high school students in technology, I have sat in on a lot of webinars recently talking about how this has accelerated the workforce, that these were trends we were already experiencing, but in a lot of ways they are being emphasized through this pandemic. Is there traction to that? How do you think that the COVID-19 crisis has changed the way that we're looking at the students in the coming years, the next few years?
That's really interesting. I'm so like, I have my own thoughts of what we should be thinking about and what we should be considering, especially having watched a school turn their classrooms into tech classrooms for 2 years. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not sure if everyone is quite, I feel like what happened in March was that everyone had to like sink or swim. It was how do we, I think having been a teacher myself, that on days when you're sick and you need a substitute, you can't hand over your lessons that easily, right? For a lot of us, okay, I've taught this class 5 times at least, so I don't have to have these really elaborate notes for how I'm going to teach this class. So if I have a substitute all of a sudden, and I wake up in the morning, I'm sick, there is no way for me to give a substitute teacher 8 hours worth of content that largely exists in my head. And I feel like that's what we were dealing with at the end of this year. Even teachers who were well equipped over the last couple of years to use technology still all of a sudden had to figure out, oh my God, how do I project this into 30 something different individual homes with different capabilities, with different, equity issues in regards to, can your parents sit alongside you while you're watching science class? Or if you're not watching science class, is someone going to sit with you and your worksheet to help you figure it out? I would really hope that COVID has super shined a spotlight on equity issues, which I think the major argument for why schools often want to do one-to-one computing with their students is that they think it's going to level the playing field. But one of the things that I found is that it can often really just exacerbate, especially we see teenagers, they flip through their smartphones like crazy. They can download TikTok and understand how to use it in a week and understand how to make like all the complicated videos that we see. So we assume that means that they, for instance, know how to touch type. So correct fingers, correct keys. But think about if you're taking an essay exam that requires you to type out your essays. If you're a kid who's hunting and pecking, your ability to write an essay over the course of 40 minutes is going to be different than your peer who, can rapid fire, type 80 words a minute or what have you. So I'm not sure. I think we're having these conversations a little bit. I'm hoping that's how people are spending their summers. I know in the spring it just like was not possible to address these things in a thoughtful way, or everyone was just kind of run ragged and adapting day to day. But I'm hoping we're having conversations of like, hey, I noticed this kid, their connection's really bad. How do we make sure everyone's got internet at home if we're gonna like require people to do things at home, or just the success of next year having to tap in online, as well as skills. One of the things I thought was such an easy fix was that the kids that were coming into the high school, I did research, didn't even have like a tech assessment. Like, why was there no 30-minute assessment of their tech skills so that they could then be pushed into computing 101 or something? Something like that I think would be such an easy fix to help us address, like, do they even know how to print, copy and pasting? Like, those are huge things that we take for granted because most of us had to sit in on like 6th grade computing classes that like a lot of these kids aren't learning right now.
What I love about that answer is the center on equity and how it draws directly back to the human-centered design. I think oftentimes when we're thinking through these problems, we put students as the user and we assume students is one homogenous group. And there are 1,000 different things affecting, what overline we address as students. So one of the things that I really pulled out is that you focused first on the family, right? So do you have someone sitting next to you? Do you have someone keeping you accountable or someone to work with? Home life situations are very different for different students. And I think that oftentimes when we go directly to one-to-one will be this umbrella solution for all of our students. If they have the device, they can do it. We're overlooking all of these other issues that might stand in the way beyond just Wi-Fi, beyond just connectivity.
Yeah, I know like some friends of mine, when one of them's a teacher and her son goes to her school, and her son is, I think, in kindergarten. So, he's learning to write letters and things like that. So, and they realized they had to go buy a printer because they had, he needed worksheets if he's going to learn how to write the letter A. And so I think after that, the school had told everyone, like, okay, we highly encourage everyone to have printers. Like, that's a substantial thing to require someone to have, or to like base your lessons around the idea that every student you're teaching has a printer. I mean, I don't even think all my friends have printers, so.
I don't have a printer. I'll be the first to admit it. Yeah, and with libraries being shut down, with the other options, maybe not wanting to walk into a Staples and pay 25 cents per page or whatever it might be, these are multifaceted issues based on kind of your access, based on your healthcare situation, et cetera, et cetera. But I think even in a traditional year, if we're going one-to-one, that looks different for different students.
Totally.
Well, pivoting again, we are only one of several organizations that you volunteered for. We found out as we did some research on you, which includes Girls Rock Chicago, Rock for Kids, and Girls on the Run, which are 3 organizations that I personally love. So I was so happy to see them in your repertoire as well. What drives you to participate so actively in your community?
Oh, when I was a kid, before I was in school, or before I was in school full time, my mom took me to volunteer. So we would spend our days like packing groceries for people that needed them, and watching people, as a 4-year-old, watching people come pick up those groceries who needed them. And being there every single day, I met everyone, and I feel like it's just been ingrained in me that if I have time and energy, that I should give some of it away. And the common theme is kids. Kids are super fun. So kids need, I'm a firm believer in it takes a village. I don't have kids, but like, I love babysitting my friends' kids. No one should be taking care of their own kids on their own. I feel like everyone needs a break, and kids also need like a variety of experiences. So I think it's just in my bones that if I've got time to give some of it away, and the kids are easy. They're just so fun.
They give you that energy right back. Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Well, as a lifelong volunteer, then what do you think makes for an impactful volunteering experience?
I think being able to see some outcomes of what you do. So with this, it's so great to read final papers. I know like sometimes you don't get to read final papers depending on everyone's process, and I think the process in their schools, but when you finally get to see all the moving parts come together, that's such a valuable thing. And I think the opportunity for connection. So like connection with you guys and your team, as well as the students. Like no one wants to feel like a behind the scenes cog. That's still like a very valuable role to play, but it's just great at the end of the day to see, even if you are behind the scenes, it's great to see like what impact that is having long term.
Yeah. I think MME is a little bit unique in that way, in that you can start from the very beginning, from a student not even really knowing their research question. Maybe they're just interested in biology, and we have to figure out how to get that into a testable question, and go all the way to, this is my full research paper on tardigrades, and I learned about these tiny water bears, and I took it this far. And seeing that progression for me too is one of my favorite parts of the program. Having said that, MME is entirely virtual, which is very different from something like Girls on the Run. It has aided us, I think, in moving towards what might be another e-learning year, but it's definitely an alternative mentorship experience for a lot of our volunteers. It's the first time they've done something like this. What are challenges you faced in virtual mentorship? And on the flip side, what makes you want to return and continue volunteering in this virtual situation?
Mm-hmm. I think one of the major challenges is providing constructive feedback while also continuing to bolster their confidence and make them feel positive about the work that they're doing. I think critique is hard for all of us at any age. I'm sort of a critique junkie, but that doesn't mean it feels good when you get it all the time. And especially they're learning, and they're all so smart and so talented. And anytime any of us turn in a first draft of everything, we're hoping like, this is going to be the time that someone says it's perfect. Like no more work is needed,
Not only is it perfect, but you were the first person who ever said something like this. You changed
Totally.
that. This is how I feel.
Absolutely. Um, so I do like one of the things that can be tough is the lack of eye contact. You know, like
Mhm.
when I write a message off, that's sort of my final word until they give me an opportunity to reply. So I'm really cognizant when I've written a message that's very full of feedback to also try to make it clear that like your project is awesome and like I'm watching you progress and you're doing a great job, but you know nothing happens in a vacuum. Like I mean, if they knew how many people touched my dissertation before it was finished, like they'd probably be shocked. And that's also part of the joy of creating, like learning to ask for help and like learning to get other people's feedback. But that's probably the most challenging is I want to make sure as best as I can that when they get a message from me that's feedback on a draft or feedback on an idea, that they walk away feeling inspired to keep going and they don't feel, you know, beaten down in the process. And then one of the things that I do think is great, you know, I've done some virtual research in the past for previous projects, and one thing I think the virtual work does is it gives people a space to like hide behind in a certain sense. You know, they can be very brave when they tell me ideas that they have. You know, I can tell when someone is like, I have this idea, I don't know if it's going to work, maybe it's not even a good idea, but because they don't have to look me in the eye, they have the opportunity to be a little bit more vulnerable than they might be if we were sitting across a table from each other. So I think that's a huge benefit is it gives them, you know, they can write me emails from their bedrooms or, you know, from their libraries and their schools when no one has to know what it is that they're sending me a message about, and they can sort of hide behind the MME process.
And I think that also speaks to the environment that you've been able to create as a mentor. So much of MME is relationship building, and you are a phenomenal example of being able to create kind of that brave space in a virtual setting for students and make them step a little bit outside of their bounds. I also wanted to circle back to what you said about critiques, because we often hear from our students on end of year surveys or just talking to them anecdotally that there's this middle space, right? They don't want to just receive a pat in the head. They don't want you to just say like, "Great job, keep
Mm-hmm.
going." Though I think if you asked anyone first try, they'd say like, "Yeah, I love a good great job. Who doesn't?" But on the other hand, creating that space digitally, where you say, I so love your work. Here are some things to create, or here are some things to fix or focus in on, can be really difficult. And I think it's something that we're all learning in this email age that we're in, that tone is everything, and being able to see eye to eye can really change that. Have you been able, with any of your students, to video conference through the platform?
I haven't. I really encouraged it this year, especially because not only were they not getting face to face contact with me, but I assume they also weren't getting face to face contact from their peers and their teachers,
Mhm.
at least in the same way that they had in the past. So I was constantly like, we can hop on a call, we can hop on a call, or, you know, like the video conference through MME if they wanted to. And it didn't really sound like they wanted to. And I didn't want to push any of them to do that. Just, you know, they've got their own demands, and I didn't want them to feel like they had to. So many of them will call me like Ms. Outland or Professor Outland or whatever, and I'm like, just it's Sarah, like we're fine. So I
Well,
didn't
now
want,
it's doctor.
yeah, but I didn't want them to feel like I was another authority figure that they had to be polite to. I mean, they should be polite,
Mhm.
but you know that they had to like really pull themselves together to talk to because I thought this is too stressful of a year. So I just encouraged it and let them know I was here and available to do it. But yeah, it wasn't something anyone wanted to take advantage of.
That's absolutely fine. This isn't a call out video, I promise. I just ask because we've also seen students who, I think a lot of people have some anxiety around video conferencing, myself included. And I think that that first breakdown of like, this is what it actually means to video conference, and like, this is what the person on the other side of this discussion board looks like, can be another really great level to virtual mentorship. So I call it out both because we hope to retain you in the future, and it's a fun thing to do with students, and for any potential volunteers watching to let them know that that's an option as well. Um, Through your experience mentoring through MME, we were talking earlier about students giving you energy, or volunteering situations giving you energy, and you giving that energy right back. What do you think you've learned from this process?
Ooh, I mean, personally, very selfishly, I think along the way, I just like, I'm not a professor. I don't have graduate student advisees. And I think it was just really nice to, as someone who's been a student for so long, I have my own faculty committee who I turn something in and they would be like, this doesn't work because XYZ, or like, why didn't you think about this? And I always felt like, oh, why don't I think about these things? Like what's missing? But then being able to advise on someone else's project, I was like, oh, it was an ability for me to see that more that we just need more people to help us, because I would see those gaps in someone else's research just because I'm coming in with a different perspective and different experience. So honestly, I think it built my confidence as a researcher to just be on the other side of the process and know, like, when I'm noting the things that are missing or the things that they should be thinking about throughout the process, it's not like, wow, how did you not think of this? It's just, they put a ton of work in and they're also coming from a certain individual perspective. And of course, we all have blind spots. And when we're researching, when we're reading about new topics, we tend to follow rabbit holes. And then we don't think about the other trails that we missed in the process. And so I think that has been like a really valuable component. Also, I'm a highly curious person, and a lot of times the students aren't studying anything that's, personally relevant to me, but I'm just like, yes, I want to know all about why you think high school students aren't reading as much as you want, as like they should. Like, let's figure this one out. So, my first year I had a student who wanted to study vaping. Like, I think students' opinions on vaping, and then I was like, I've never really thought about this, but all I wanted to do then was figure it out, or I'd see an article like, hey, we should think about this thing too. So I think just as a highly curious person, it's just fun to help people answer questions that I wouldn't have asked on my own.
Yeah. And in the same way that we have mentors from, University of Chicago, but also MIT in California, et cetera, to really match those student interests, our students are so curious. It's so fun to see just the pure breadth of what they want to study. There was a great project that I always think of when this comes up on the soundtrack in the Legends of Zelda video game. And I was like, I have never once played Legends of Zelda. I do not know what that soundtrack is, but I want to know everything you think about it because you wanted to bring it to a research project. And that's such an interesting, in-depth kind of like subset of interest. I don't know. So I'm glad that speaks to you as well. I also love what you're saying about flipping the script a little bit. In your professional life, you've been the recipient of commentary and critique and et cetera, and being able to be the person who comes with the more critical eye and kind of offers more directions to take your project in. I think that's so valuable and not something that I always think of when I'm recruiting for this program and trying to find more mentors. The benefit that mentors get from having that perspective and the confidence building. That's really great to hear about. Okay, well, the flip side of that question is always, what do you think the students who work with you are able to take away from their experience? Because it's not the same as having somebody come and sit with you in a traditional academic year or having in-person volunteering. What do you think kind of MME allows for students to do?
Um, I I think, and I would also hope that it gives them an opportunity to communicate with someone who, isn't an. I always feel like it's so important to have people to like look up to or who can assist you who aren't authority figures.
Mm-hmm.
So just more people that you can be vulnerable with, I think is super helpful. Like, I like I'm not friends with my students, but we definitely get to a point of friendliness. And I think that is really, I think I never had any adults in my life who weren't in charge of me in some capacity. And I would hope that I provide them an opportunity to have this advisor who's honestly just there because they want to be there and not there because I don't give them a grade, right? We don't rank our students or give them scores or anything at the end of this process. We're truly just there because we care about students and their projects. So I hope that it gives them an opportunity to know, like, I'm not your teacher, so you're not going to like be in trouble. I had a student this year who I think struggled with deadlines a little bit and would constantly apologize. And I was like, it's easier for me when I have a longer turnaround to read something that's 20 pages and really be slow and methodical in my feedback. I can do it quickly and give you less good feedback, but like I don't need you to apologize to me because I'm a resource, and hoping that they walk away knowing like, again, we're here voluntarily. I'm not going to talk to your teacher after this is over, and this isn't going to give you an F because you were like slower on your deadlines, but it is like I had a whole conversation that was like, I understand deadlines are hard, and as a graduate student, it's all discipline. We have no actual deadlines ever, and it's a hard thing to learn, but like, it's a thing we all have to learn, and this is a self-guided project, so you take your own pace. It may be that my feedback won't be as great as it once was. It would have been with a longer runway, but yeah, I hope it's like a way to understand what it's like to work with someone who's not in charge of you or doesn't have any determining role in your life, I guess.
Yeah, no, I think that's really valuable, and we think about it a lot in terms of, students have group projects and they have peers and they work with those peers, and students have teachers and students have parents. But you're right, those kind of extra relationships, whether it be through an internship and colleagues that you get who are older than you, or my family calls it friends of all sizes, when you're like, oh, I met this person and they're not in my typical circle, and they really gave me this other perspective and let me know what it's like to collaborate on these things. The other tiny anecdotal thing that I'll share is we had a teacher tell us once that she was debriefing with her student, and her student said, well, Brad said this. And the teacher's like, okay, who is Brad? Let's back up a little bit here. Who are you talking to about this project? And it was their MME mentor. And she was like, oh, do you mean like Mr. Smith or whoever it might have been? But the student said, he said, it's okay if I call him Brad. And it absolutely is, because we're trying to foster those kind of relationships where you're right, it's not a friendship, but it's a resource, it's a mentorship. And that looks different than a teacher-student relationship. Most of our students, the statistic is something like 72%, 74% report that they've never worked with a mentor, like a professional outside of the classroom before these projects. And I think that's so valuable to bring to students and to let them experiment with this external resource. So I'm glad you shouted it out.
I think it's also important for our own like professional networking that, I know so many people when they're ready to look for a new job, and I'm like, okay, like here's our plan for how you need to do networking and talk to these kinds of people and blah, blah, blah. And everyone's so stressed about, cold emailing someone or asking someone for a favor. And yes, we should definitely be cognizant of taking other people's time, but I think so often people actually do want to help. And I mean, I think it's so important to have mentors in my own life. So hopefully this is also just an introduction to asking for help when you need it, and being prepared if someone says they can't or they don't have the bandwidth, but knowing that like most people are open and want to help you if you need help.
I think there is nothing more flattering than someone saying to you, can I pick your brain about this? I'm always like, oh, my brain? Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for asking.
Totally.
So I agree. I think that's a good thing to reinforce in students. Like, there are helpers and they're out there, and people like to be asked for their expertise. Backtracking a little bit, you mentioned a student of yours who was doing a project on vaping, and that student actually went all the way through our student research showcase and was able to present their findings to a group of people, and you were able to come. We were really happy to have you. So I just wanted to ask you about what it was like to meet your student in person, because that's not always part of MME. And did the mentoring relationship translate to your kind of in-person interactions?
So that last year was my first year, and Philip was, I think, the first student who matched with me, and like could not have set a better standard for an MME relationship. He took his project so seriously. I think we probably communicated multiple times a week throughout the entire school year, and there were times I would, because we would share Google Documents, or he would share Google Documents with me, and I might leave him comments, and you get like the notification that someone responded. He'd be working and sending me responses at like midnight on Saturdays. And I was like, Philip, like take a break, it's fine. But he was just so engaged. Or like he made me a video at the beginning that was just him walking me through his data and how he was thinking about things. Like he was just so involved in his project, and he was so clever in how he wanted to communicate things. Like, he didn't want to write down his whole process. He wanted to do a screen cap and walk me through his organization, which was awesome, and I never would have thought of. So of course, when it came time to nominate people for the showcase, he was top of mind. I was so happy to see him selected. All the projects there were incredible, just blew my mind in terms of the questions they asked and the work the kids put in. But it was such a pleasure to meet Philip. He's just such a perfectly self-possessed young man that it was so great to meet him in person. We He had mentioned, I think he was interested in going to the University of Chicago, and I had told him to keep in touch if there was anything I could help with. And I think he would have been graduating this past school year, so I'm not sure where he ended up. I hope that everything ended in high school really well for him. Oh, but one really cool thing, I did get to actually go to his high school too and assist with his AP like presentation,
Oh,
which was
so
great.
cool.
So I got to meet his teacher. I think I met his parents. Like it was just a whole process, but it was like again with the what makes a volunteer experience valuable is getting to see the whole process. Like watching him at a school day with his, sweaty hands, very nervous to do his presentation. Um, Going over, there's guidelines for the questions that you ask whenever he's done with his presentation. So going over those with his teacher, it was just a real joy to see like how this whole process fit into his high school experience.
Well, I almost feel like you just answered our last question here, but I'll ask it anyway to see if you have any final thoughts. As we move into a virtual year, what would you tell a potential mentor wondering if virtual mentorship like this can be meaningful?
Oh, I mean, I think I would just say it's just like many things in life, you get out of it what you put into it. So it can be a lot of work, but in a good way. I mean, and the great thing about virtual is that you can answer emails and messages at night or early in the morning. Or when I was in field work, I would often answer them in passing periods at the high school. So the great thing is you can fix it to your schedule. And I was always very clear with students like on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, I have long 12-hour days. So I respond on Tuesdays and Thursdays unless you ask me otherwise. So that's super great that you can fix it into your own schedule. And yeah, I think it's just about putting in what you want to get out. If you want to be an all business contact that's just reading drafts and giving feedback, you can do that. But if you are a person who wants the connection, I think it just kind of happens, like when students were fumbling through various parts of their, coming up with the question, the research question is one of the hardest parts of the project. And telling students my own stories of, fumbling through my own research questions, or they want to have a perfect interview guide if they're going to be interviewing people, and telling them like every time I make an interview guide, I probably throw out 2 or 3 of my own questions. Like it's okay if some of them don't work. So I think the ways that you like support them and it like that builds connection, I think, between students, because otherwise you're just firing off like fix this doesn't work, and then that's not fun for anyone.
Then you're just Google, and
Yeah,
they already
it's
have
true.
that.
It's true.
Well, Sarah, thank you so much. We so appreciate you, and I feel like you gave me a lot to think about in addition to hopefully our viewers and our potential future mentors. So again, if you as an audience member are interested in mentoring, please leave a comment, send us a message. We are always recruiting. And as Sarah said, we have so many students interested in such a variety of things that I promise your expertise is needed and wanted. Sarah, thank you, and congratulations again on the PhD. So
Thank
exciting.
you.